Welcome. We're going to get started and really excited to be able to share with all of you today Dan Buegler's West Ed report on lessons from the California Language and Learning Initiative, which we call CALLI. Just want to do a little bit of introduction for the folks that you're going to be hearing from today. And so first of all, I'll let Dan introduce himself. You can see a little bit of his bio on the screen, but Dan has been partnering with us since 2017 as part of this network. And so Dan, just want to say a few words.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Buegler, Senior Research Associate at West Ed. Been with the organization for about 12 years now, and primarily focus on research and evaluation projects with a variety of clients. Most of those are K-12, although I do have a number of university-based clients and look at that intersection between high school and the university. Before this, I was a senior vice president for the Atlanta Education Fund, which was supporting Atlanta public schools and escaped just prior to the great Atlanta cheating scandal. So I didn't have to deal with that. But I was also spent 5 years in charge of research, evaluation, and accountability for Chicago public schools. So came into this work with a pretty strong understanding of how districts work, which I think has really helped me make sense of this project. So thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Dan. Before I introduce our panelists, I'll just say that I'm Steve Kellner. I'm the Director of Program Sustainability and Growth here at California Education Partners. And so I'll be sort of your master of ceremonies today, and very excited to introduce our panelists who have all had interesting connections with CALLI over the 5 years. And so I'll ask them to introduce themselves and also talk about how their role either remained the same or changed during the 5 years that they were with CALLI. So we'll start with Jody Marceline.
Good morning. I'm Jody Marceline, and I'm the director of our district to district program. And when we started CALLI, I was a senior program manager, and I helped launch CALLI. So through the 5 or 6 years that we started, I was program manager, assistant director, and now director.
And Amy.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Williams, and my journey through CALLI started as a participant while I was in Sanger Unified. And at that time, Jody was our program manager, and then evolved to the lead of our CALLI team. And then just recently, a few years ago, hopped over to be a part of the Cal Ed team and family and support and move this work forward. So I've had a very unique perspective and journey along the CALLI story.
Great, thanks, Amy. Ruben, tell us.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ruben Reyes, superintendent of the Robla Elementary School District. I'm happy to report that I have been the superintendent in Robla the entire time we've been involved with CALLI. Initially, 5 years ago when we joined, our focus was with the intermediate grade language and learning initiative, focusing on language use in the classroom. And we stayed with that cohort for about 4 years. And then we moved over to the cohort focused on early literacy. And we're part of that group, Amy being our manager there, and continue our work actually to this day, even beyond what was started with CALLI. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben. And Lauren, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Lauren Inman. I am an assistant principal at Terra Linda High School, which is a high school in Marin under the San Rafael City Schools District. I also feel like I had a pretty unique experience. I entered into our district's CALLI collaborative work. We were participating in the math cohort. I entered as an English teacher and instructional coach, and then transitioned to an administrative role for the site in which I taught. And so it was a really unique experience that I'm excited to share with everybody today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lauren. You will definitely be hearing from our panelists throughout. And what I'll also say at this point too is we'll be monitoring the chat. So don't hesitate to put any questions that you have in there as we present, and then we will definitely have time for an open back and forth later in the presentation. But don't hesitate to use the chat. And as we are able to, we'll address your questions in real time. For those of you who are not as familiar with Ed Partners, and also just to get an overview of what California Education Partners does, we'd like to share with you this short video that we put together at the conclusion of CALLI, and to give you an idea of the different perspectives. You'll see some familiar faces in here, some of which are joining us today, but you'll also get to hear from many folks who couldn't join us. So if you just kind of sit back and enjoy this for about 2.5 minutes, then we'll come right back.
What makes CALLI Collaborative more unique than other professional developments that I've been a part of is the ability to bring districts together and provide that time and space for districts to share ideas, learn from each other, and ask good questions.
Our CALLI network was a group of districts, 27 districts in all, that came together back in 2016 to focus on different aspects of literacy.
It really became a think tank for ROBLA, something that helped us to look closely at our instructional issues and think really about what in our system might not be working efficiently and how we might improve it.
For districts, I think it's just an amazing gift of time with hopefully the right team in the room so that you can see your problems from all different areas, and you can do some just kind of big goal setting to meet the needs of your kids and your families. And you can cycle back around to see where you are on track towards meeting that goal.
The idea that you have teacher leaders that are working together, in our case coaches, is a great model, I think, for all disciplines to follow.
When we took a look at our data, our classroom practices, we did see improvement, and so the outcomes are encouraging. Our third year in with our partnership, we really saw a dramatic increase in rise in both states testing as well as our local assessments.
Just within the 5 years that I participated in it, we saw a 180 transformation with our math department in terms of how they viewed traditional instruction versus a noisy classroom with healthy student discourse about math.
Some of the practices we've learned directly from other districts through our CALLI collaboration, and some we've just learned and moved on and continue with our learning. So that's what gives me hope, not only for our students themselves, but for our community.
We had been involved in some different professional learning networks previously, but this one in particular, when districts are really grappling with some of the same similar issues, was definitely very attractive.
What we've heard from districts after CALLI has finished is they're still reaching out to each other. They're still learning from each other, and they're excited to have somebody else in this work that understands the work that they're doing.
CALLI's ending kind of officially, but our schools are continuing to work together without CALLI. So that's probably the best proof that CALLI works, is that it's not even here, but we're still continuing on with the model.
What CALLI has taught us in terms of a system is it's adaptable to anything. And by the way, we don't know what's coming next, so you have to be very adaptable. So really, it's been a shift in our thinking to be able to utilize the continuous improvement model for almost any situation.
Okay, great, thank you for that. And again, thanks to our participants. We had a team go across California this fall and get a lot of those shots. So we were really appreciative of their time for that. Just to give you an overview of where CALLI was and what this looks like, wanted to give you a sense of the focus that Ed Partners has is typically on districts that don't get a lot of national attention. We know that folks want to work with Long Beach and LA Unified and San Francisco and Oakland, and that's great for them. But we tend to focus on districts that have just as important needs and kids and teachers that are just as deserving, but don't get that kind of attention and don't get those kind of resources. So you can see up and down the state, those are districts that might not roll off the tongue at first, right? But now that you've seen Ruben and Lauren, you're going to know all about Robla and San Rafael, as well as some other districts on here. But what I would also like to point out and ask Jody to talk a little bit about is the process by which districts became connected with CALLI. Because it wasn't as if we sent out an email and then 2 days later started a collaboration. So Jody, if you just want to talk a little bit about the district selection and the launch process, that'd be great.
Absolutely. And one thing I didn't add was prior to CALLI, I was in Sanger Unified for 18 years. And I was a participant like Amy was in another collaboration called Scale Up. And it was 6 districts within the Central Valley who were working on early literacy. And the work that we were doing there was so rich. We were working with Kenji Hakuda, who was also part of Ed Partners. And through that work, we realized we want to spread this beyond just the Central Valley. So they were really the pioneers that really spread this work. And that's why the name of the collaboration is Language and Literacy, because it didn't matter if you were in high school mathematics, academic language, or early literacy. Language and literacy really spanned those 3 collaborations. So again, going back to Kenji, he had an EL network that Robla and all of these districts were really involved in. And so we went and we did some pretty deep interviews and discussions with them, an application process to really see what their readiness and willingness to do this work. And we launched that in the fall of 2015. And through that process, we had 25 districts who launched with us, a very deep launch process, by the way. It was 4 full days of really getting into the work and really deciding what is going to be the focus in the collaboration that they were in. And as Ruben mentioned, we actually had the opportunity through our partners at Bill and Melinda Gates, who we thank profusely for funding this work. We had a CALLI 101. So we did that work for 3 years. And then we, again, in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we were able to provide opportunities for districts to take another 2 years if they wanted to go deeper with us. And the districts, as you probably heard in the video, who said, you know, that ability, we were right there, we were just learning what we needed to, and those 2 extra years really catalyzed them to another level.
Thanks for that. Again, these slides will be available following the webinar for those of you who are taking notes or taking screenshots. We'll be happy to send those out to you. The other thing I'll lift up before we get into some additional details is just the approach that Ed Partners takes. We do have a continuous improvement process, which we'll talk to you about just in a moment, but it's always in service of students. We want to hold students at the forefront of the work, and in particular, build the capacity of district staff who are the ones who can change lives. I think all too often in education, you hear about the best new thing or the fancy new curriculum or the great new app that's going to change lives. And really, it's the people working with kids that are going to change lives. And so that's where we tend to focus our work in service of students. And as Jody mentioned, we've been doing this work for a little over 12 years. This is the CALLI collaboration that we're talking about, but both Ruben and Lauren's districts have continued to work with us in other areas, and we're excited to see where that takes us. But we always try, and you'll hear throughout the presentation today, to apply the learnings of one collaboration to the next collaboration. We continue to get better. We try to practice what we preach, and to that end, hopefully you'll hear a little bit more about that today. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Jody to talk a little bit about the Ed Partners Promise, and Amy's going to talk to you a little bit about our continuous improvement.
Thank you. And as Steve said, we are very much a learning organization. We're always wanting to improve what we do to support our districts. And one of those is the reason why Steve asked each panel member to talk about where were you at the beginning to where you are now, is one of our learnings is those program managers who are working shoulder to shoulder with our districts, they needed to be able to say, they've been in your shoes, they have empathy for you because they've done the work as well. So I think that's really important to know that you've got people who are educators and they've dug into this work, working alongside of you. One of the other things that we know is that we don't want to work with districts forever. We want to build their capacity to sustain this work and work beyond us. So our promise to districts is to help them build those habits of continuous improvement. We give them a lot of tools and processes to try on, but it really becomes about their context and taking on those tools and those different ways of being to make it contextually driven for themselves. And of course, this is all in service to improve outcomes for students. So part of the way, if you go to the next one, Steve, that we do that is helping districts create a continuous improvement culture, a collaborative continuous improvement culture. And we really synthesize them down to 3 different principles that really create sustainability of a system. We give you those tools and processes and structures, but that's not going to create sustainability. What creates that is to actually have equity at the center of this work. We have to reach all of the kids. And as Steve mentioned, the districts that we engage with have high EL students, have high population of socially economically disadvantaged students. So we really need to make sure that we are providing access to all of our students to that rich learning. And also just changing the mindsets and empowering educators. Lauren was talking earlier about that classroom level. We really dig into what is the shift that is occurring in the classroom, and then we will help you create systems around that shift to support that. And to be able to have that system is you need to have hands, which is what we call it, but it's really about collaboration. It's collaboration within your district, it's collaboration across your district. And we call our collaborations collaboration because we don't work with districts in isolation. We bring them together to work together because, again, we want them to have that network of relationships and trust way long after we leave, so that they have that beyond us.
I'm going to introduce Amy to talk a little bit about the way in which we connect. Jody mentioned that we do this work in collaboration with districts, but it's really intentional the way we bring teams together. So I'm going to let Amy talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so along the thread of being a learning organization, when teams originally were being created by their districts, it was usually situated in those of the willing and able. And they began the work. And what we realized as we began working with districts and their continual improvement process, we were noticing and gathering information about those districts that were able to get traction sooner, that were able to move their system along faster. And so based on those learnings, we have been more strategic and thoughtful, taking those districts and what they had in common. You know, oftentimes those districts had multiple communication points about the CALLI work they were doing. And they often had leadership actively engaged in the progress of that movement. So we took that learning and created a more strategic plan for districts to engage in the work. So a more intentional approach about who's on teams, what kind of structures are in the district that allow the improvement work to move forward more fluidly, gain more traction with the expectation of greater sustainability and scale. So the first and foremost, we realized that the lead is critical and pivotal in the work. So having a lead that is also situated as a decision maker, so that when teams are coming together, there's actually a member that can make those systems-based decisions. And so teams don't get held up in, oh, well, we've got to go contact this person or we've got to go contact that person. So realizing that that lead is a critical implementer of this work, and then putting together an improvement team that reflects the vertical roles and responsibilities in the districts, especially elevating that teacher leader, that classroom-based leader who's going to be that first initial effort in making those shifts for improvement, and then to be able to feed the team, you know, what worked, what didn't, as they move forward in their cycles of improvement. And they would also notice that districts that were more successful, they had more communication points with people in their district beyond the team. So maybe they had, you know, like a principal PLC or principal group that they would be talking to and sharing the information and growth. So what we are encouraging as an important structure to this work is for districts to have a guiding coalition, to be able to share this work with others in the district that may be potential opportunities to spread and scale. And that way nothing, the information is flowing throughout the organization and nobody's surprised. And more importantly, nobody's sitting in silos. The information is getting out there. And then key and critical is the superintendent. This should all be in alignment to their vision, their mission for what they want their students, their staff, and their culture to be. So being much more intentional about those structures and those people engaged in this work. So that was a great learning, and we are implementing it now and having much more success with supporting districts and moving the work forward. And then talking about some of the ways in which we support, I think one of the things that I want to make clear is that it is the work that's done in between the space where we come together. So as program managers, we're much more in contact with our leads and teams to be that consistent coach, that consistent ear, that consistent facilitator that can help move the work forward. So we've established some cadence to the work. So those monthly check-ins with our leads, and monthly, I would say probably more like weekly, and then having those regular improvement team meetings monthly to ensure that we're moving forward in the work. We can do some check-ins in the middle of that improvement cycle to see how teachers are doing in that implementation. Are they coming up roadblocks that maybe we can clear away right away? And then obviously we have our convenings 3 times a year as a way to get that collaboration group together. And I think one of the folks mentioned in the video is the importance of bringing districts together, that networking, that relationship building, that community that exists beyond the time teams are with CALLI. I still have close relationships with the folks that I was in CALLI with. And when I was in Sanger, being able to get on the telephone and just say, hey, what are you doing about this, was also critical to what we were experiencing and moving the work forward. As a matter of fact, Benta is one of those people as well. So ways in which we support our districts is obviously that district to district partnership, building those relationships, building those networks, and then coaching to improve complex systems. This is not easy work. You have to be intentional. You have to be thoughtful. You have to show empathy as someone that engaged in this work, being able to put myself in their shoes and support and talk through these challenges is critical. We also are able to broker knowledge with experts in the field so that districts aren't kind of going after whatever they think might be best, but really we can connect them to researchers, practitioners that have evidence-based outcomes for their work, and sharing that with districts so that they can be much more focused and coherent in what they're implementing or shifts they're trying to make. And then flexibility, right? We all know that flexibility is the name of the game, and even more so now in this space and time. So we have been responsive to our districts in terms of going through virtual spaces for learning as well as in person, and then pulling back when it's just not the right time or space to do that. So being flexible in the way that we can all interact with one another.
Thank you.
And then
Cup is so cute.
gaining common data, right? So learning what our students are telling us, what they know or don't know yet, through some common data to help us ground our work and then focus on those movement forwards to accelerate our growth. And then we also provide opportunities for shared learning where we bring our district folks together, we bring their staff together and have an opportunity to engage in learning from experts in the field. So those are just a few of the ways that we really engage and support the districts and teams and teachers and leaders we work with.
Awesome. And so you've probably heard a couple times people mentioning professional learning, professional development, and you're like, this doesn't sound like professional development. It really isn't your typical professional development. We do really work at the classroom level with teachers. We ensure, as Amy said, making sure teachers are on the team and empowering them to really get the shifts that they need. But all of those things that Amy just mentioned is really in service of ongoing professional learning and deepening that through coaching. So it's not a one and done. And as Steve mentioned, the districts that we work with typically don't have access to the experts. We worked with Phil Darrow, we worked with Steve Weirs, and Stanford through David Pearson and so forth. And so what we learned again, and I'm going to move this through quickly because no one wants to sit around and talk about a framework, but I will say what we did learn was we had some districts who had an idea of what they wanted to do with the solution and just ran with it without a plan. We had others who wanted to make a pretty plan and put a bow on it and like kind of spin around in the plan and never really went to execution. So we really honed in on what does that process need to look like, and that the blue and red part of that is really going deep into, you're coming to us with a challenge area you want to focus in, but what exactly part of that challenge or that system is really producing the issue that you're having. And then using that information to really design a plan of action to execute, and then to learn from that through consolidated learning and reflecting on it. And then as you can see above that, the principles we mentioned earlier, throughout all of that, building a collaborative culture in the district. So when we leave, they have that moving forward. This looks linear, but as Steve goes to the next slide, it's actually very cyclical. And if you're used to PDSAs, that's kind of what that looks like, an ongoing scaffolding and really improving through the data that you're bringing to the table. And as Amy mentioned, all of this is through differentiated support by the program manager to ensure that some districts need a little bit more acceleration, while some others might need some further extension.
Thanks, Jody. And at this time, I want to turn things over to Dan so we can kind of walk through the way he did his methodology and the process by which he gathered the information that you see in the report there. And then we'll bring it all together with our panelists at the end. And so, Dan, I'll turn things over to you.
All right, thanks, Stephen. So one thing to keep in mind is I had been working with the Math in Common collaboration as an external evaluator hired by the Bechtel Foundation. And so it spent 2 years really working with Ed Partners and their staff and understanding their process before Ed Partners then hired me as a contracted external evaluator of the CALLI initiative. So I came in with kind of an understanding of the way they approach the work and the way the districts work together, and many of the aspects that they were part of the collaboration for Math in Common carried over into CALLI, although certainly not all of them. And the other thing is Ed Partners made available to me everything that they had in their data files related to their grant applications, their theory of action, all the memos they were writing each other, all the reflections that they would do, the many, many meetings that they did in preparation for the collaboration and for different elements of the collaboration. I had access to all their thinking and able to look and see how that thinking evolved. And in addition, I had access to the workspace that all the districts were using throughout the collaboration. so I could look and see what was their aim in year one, what were the issues that they were confronting them, and what was their thinking, because a lot of this is put in writing as they worked through that plan in year one, and how did it change in year 2 and 3. And it's very interesting, as part of this work, doing some case studies on those districts and be able to track them over the full length of time they're in the program and look and see how their thinking had changed. So then a lot of that preparation work occurred before I ever got to any kind of interviews. I did attend convenings, I think 2 or 3 in person, and then 2 or 3 in Zoom during the COVID time. So I had a lot of context even prior to starting in on any of the interviews or focus groups. And I was able to go into interviews with individuals and really have a pretty good understanding what their team had been doing and what they were trying, so we could really delve in. And the other thing is, the purpose of my evaluation was to help ed partners get better. It was really, what's working for the districts, what's not working for the districts, what could be improved, what ideas do they have, and really try and give them a safe space to say what they might not be willing to say in front of ed partners. Although, as I learned, districts in this collaboration love this collaboration, and it's really difficult to get them to say, you can't get them to say anything negative. It's difficult to get them to give you constructive criticism. I had to get pretty creative. Ask them, if you were a consultant coming in, what would you, things like that. I think we can go to the next slide. See. When we started out, I think the hope was at the end of the evaluation, we'd be really looking in at the data. And as COVID happened, that never really occurred. We never really had the cast of data that we thought we might have. So it stayed pretty much a formative evaluation throughout. Within districts, part of the evaluation protocol was trying to walk districts through the evidence they had in hand of what's happened to you personally. What do you see happening with your team? What's happening in the district? What changes are happening in classrooms? What changes are happening with students? What evidence do you have around any of these? And much of that evidence that we were able to look at tended to be informal or anecdotal or qualitative. But there were districts that had, especially early on, had pretty big successes. One district in particular told us, we implemented a new change for high school students to try and improve their algebra work. And the test scores jumped so dramatically, we had to, the state came in to look at those results and see if they were legitimate. So we did have districts that had very robust examples of improvement, but for many districts, they were relying on informal indicators, teacher reports, classroom observations, and in many cases, their interim assessments that they were developing to try and measure whether or not students were changing. And many districts had things like exit tickets to see whether or not students had understood the concept. So for many districts, the type of things that they were able to look at were those sort of things. I think Amy, actually, you can stay on that slide for a minute, Steve. Amy had mentioned, the noisy classroom, and that was one thing when we asked participants, what sort of evidence they had that showed something was happening in classrooms. This was one that in several different districts, there was such a focus on academic conversations by students or vocabulary-rich conversations by students. And I heard many examples of the evidence they were gathering of this happening in the classrooms, either through observations or in the case of one school, it was hearing those noisy classrooms was something very different for a math department. They were used to instructor-led instruction and not teacher discourse or student discourse. And so when they would walk down the halls and hear those noisy classrooms in the math wing, they knew something different was happening in the district. many districts were using empathy interviews and going in and talking with students and asking what they thought of the different approaches. And they learned that, one district learned that these vocabulary rich conversations, even students that they normally thought of as being very shy and quiet, found they just loved those. It gave them a structured way to interact in a classroom. And so, we were able to gather a lot of evidence around that. And probably the most powerful evidence people talked about was the personal capacity they felt they gained by participating in this. And the panel is evidence of individuals who were involved in this were moving up in the ranks. And, I'd interview people, and one year they'd be a teacher, the next year they'd be a coach. Some of the participants moved on up to be superintendent. And to a person, they would talk about this being some of the most incredible professional development they'd ever experienced. And they could equally see the same professional development happen with their team and learning new capacities of team members. And then, the other evidence people talk a lot about was just the changes that occurred both within their team and within the leadership of their district, switching over to what they called an improvement mindset, developing those structures, developing that the idea that we want to do iterative improvement cycles. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. The teams developed really strong trust in each other to be honest about what was happening or what was working. And so these were some of the things that people really pointed to. You can switch slides, Steve. When I asked people about Ed Partners, they loved Ed Partners, but one of the things they really loved was that they saw Ed Partners trying to improve. And particularly when you talk to people about the differences between what they saw in CALLI 101 and CALLI 201. Ed Partners did three things in that transition that participants really noted. One was they hired new staff that had a lot of school and district experience. And this really resonated with the participants. They felt like they could relate better, that they were getting much more specific advice that was useful. They just really loved it. There was a sharper focus. You could see it in the materials. I could see it in the materials, just going from Math and Common up through into CALLI 202, 201. A sharper focus on the improvement cycles. There's more clarity, more direction. When I walked around and talked to people at that first 201 convening and asked them, what do you think of the new way of laying out this work? And to a person, people were really excited. They felt like they could understand it better, that it made more sense. And they were appreciative that Ed Partners was responding to some of the things that they had talked about in some of our earlier interviews. And then there was, again, a new emphasis on making sure you've got the right team there and that you've got district leadership support. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. People love, I'm still on that slide, Steve. I'm probably too long-winded, but people love the direct support from Ed Partners. They really relish the learning from and with their peers, something that I heard over and over again. And particularly for these rural districts, their access to content experts when they had a particular problem that they were trying to solve, to be able to pull somebody from Stanford and be able to ask them specifically about strategies, maybe even have them come in and talk with their teachers. They found that just invaluable. And then kind of coupled with that, this whole enterprise of the collaboration, very often participants talked about the structure of the collaboration created an accountability that they needed. And districts and schools are so overwhelmed with so many issues, it's hard for them to stay focused on one thing. The cyclical nature of coming back for a convening, people felt that accountability. They felt a responsibility to their peers. They wanted to be ready. We got to get this work done, so when we show up to convening, we can talk to our partners over in Robla or wherever they were. And they really felt a sense of shared accountability for this work. Which just said, it's hard to replicate in another setting. And then having that team time, as silly as that sounds, being able to get all your team into a room together for a few concentrated hours on one topic was just a huge value to districts. Go ahead, Steve. when COVID hit, part of the whole interview and the focus of the evaluation changed, and we really wanted to know, what happened, what changed. And everybody really talked about how they fell back on the structures that they learned, the team trust, the improvement mindset, and the methods they had learned. And they directly applied them to what was happening to them now because of COVID. They no longer had students in the classroom. Their problems changed, and overnight, they pulled their teams together and said, we got to come up with a new understanding of what problem it is we're trying to solve, and how do we measure it, and how do we do it. And they found themselves falling back in many cases on empathy interviews with teachers and with students, trying to understand, why aren't students logging on? Why are students getting all these D's and F's? What can they do differently? And trying to learn directly from them. And then creating a whole process around that. All right, students aren't logging on. What can we do differently? And coming up with a strategy, coming up with measures, coming up with a way to periodically check on that. And then 5-6 weeks later, reviewing the evidence and going back and trying again. So the districts really did take what they learned from the CALLI collaboration and applied it in a new area. And I think in some districts, they felt like to great success. Go ahead, Steve. Finally, kind of throughout the evaluation, but really particularly in the last go around, we asked the districts to talk about what does it take to be successful in a collaboration like this. And I think it came down to the ideas that you see on the page here, and starting with having the right team, making sure you have teachers in central office and leadership. And if you're missing one, things just aren't going to work the way you want them to, for a variety of reasons. The focus on culture was huge. The teams would talk about the importance of being able to trust each other. That, if you're a teacher talking to the superintendent about what's not working in the district, it takes a lot of trust to be able to do that and think that tomorrow I'll still have a job. You really can't underemphasize the importance of the trust of this process. Districts really needed, they'd come up with these big goals that they wanted to accomplish, and then dive in and then realize they needed to break that down. They needed to find a small problem they could actually succeed at, and then gradually scale it. And so districts had to learn how to figure out what the right size problem was. They talked a lot about, the concept Ed Partners introduced to them of being in the learning zone, that they needed to stay in a learning zone for much longer than they might have normally thought they needed to, in order to fully understand what the problem was and to fully think about the various avenues that they might take to try and address that problem. And that became a really important thing. I think identifying evidence and using evidence is probably one of the areas teams struggle with the most. People aren't, across the board, across the whole team, they're not all assessment experts. They're not evaluation people. They haven't really thought about measurement or, valid and reliable measures. And it's been a process with the teams that where they've had to try and think through just how rigorous and how reliable is this evidence? Can we get something better? And I think that's a kind of an ongoing struggle with districts, but something that they also recognize they need to do. Finally, teams really talked about being willing to fail now, that the importance of failure toward learning, that, before the collaboration, if you failed at something, you were done, that was it. And now that's just a stepping stone to eventually solving the problem. So I'm going to stop there. Got one more bullet, but
no, that's great, Dan.
Time.
It's perfect time to bring in Lauren and Ruben on this. And so, it's one thing to hear Dan, and we trust Dan and we believe Dan, but we have real people who really did this with us. And so we'll start with Lauren. And Lauren, as you look at those sort of takeaways, what most resonates with you, and what would you tell other districts who wanted to do this work that resonated with your team?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like Dan very much captured my sentiment and my team and how we felt kind of within this process. But, I really think that Ed Partners, they led the professional development the exact same way I would expect an amazing classroom teacher would do, in that they created autonomy. So teams got to show up where they were in that moment and create an aim that made sense for their student population, that made sense for the capacity that they had as a team. And then, so the autonomy was there, and Ed Partners provided us with, as they demonstrated in some of the visuals, really that process, that system. So, I think my favorite aspect of it was getting that team time that was invaluable, but also being able to share ideas with other districts, have our Ed Partners come in with a question that made you pause and think, okay, the direction that I thought we were going, that question really, it made me think of it in a different way, or it provided some expertise that maybe we didn't have at the table. So, what really resonates with me is that process. There wasn't a one size fits all. The days that we spent together were not filled with a big agenda, and Ed Partners was constantly listening to our needs in the moment and adjusting their plans from there. So it felt every time like a really valuable way of using our time. And as Dan pointed out, we wanted to hold ourselves accountable because we were showing up with other districts, and we wanted to make sure that we were continuing with our work. So that, of course, really stood out to me. And then, of course, the impacts that we saw within the classroom, within the math department. I mean, Dan mentioned, I certainly, when I started at Linda High School, our math department was the most traditional teacher-centered classroom. It was quiet when I walked those halls. And over the course of our time with CALLI, it transformed. And student discourse that was taking place in the classroom filled the halls. Teachers went from having rows to having collaborative groupings of tables in a math classroom, which hadn't been done before in our school. And then we saw a direct impact, what our data was showing us. Just in our 2 initial years, the Smarter Balanced Assessment data, specifically in the strand of student discourse, shot up. And I think what maybe wasn't mentioned here, but worth mentioning because I witnessed it within our math department, the morale amongst the math teachers improved. The buy-in improved because of the morale, and they became a department of yeses. And that has allowed me now, stepping into my role as an administrator, to, push more, create greater change, have a bigger impact, and use our math department as an example when we do other work in other areas. So those are a couple of highlights that stood out to me.
Thanks, Lauren. We appreciate that. And Ruben, as you mentioned, you had the same job for all 5 years of CALLI, and not only a job, but as a superintendent. So I'd love to hear you talk about what you saw within your team and within ROBLA during the course of this.
Absolutely. First of all, I think I would say that I was lucky enough, actually I'd like to say I was smart enough to realize that being on the CALLI team myself was an important ingredient in terms of the culture of my school district, and the need to have the person who has the ability to kind of really get a message out or to influence administrators, I think turned out to be a really big key for us. I think what I would say, first of all, I guess I would say that what Lauren talked about, what Dan talked about in terms of what's happening in other districts, it strikes me so much that so much of that is true in ROBLA. And it really hits home today how, this formula really does seem to work in no matter kind of where you might try to apply it. You see that positive influence. And when you make it your own in your district, the ingredients are there. I would say for me, the thing that really stands out is, even though we focused a lot on the data as well, and our CALLI leads and our consultants and our thought partners always pushed us to be looking at data and analyzing data and reacting to data. I would say the nebulous part around cultural shift, I think, is something that is really striking to me. I think we all know this in school systems, the shift of culture can be so difficult. And when you really look at yourself and you realize that you have those dysfunctional parts of yourself that aren't working well, and you heard Lauren talk about what her classrooms looked like before CALLI, and a lot of that is really true for what was happening in Robla. And it feels overwhelming. How do you begin to tackle that? And it really is about getting people to think differently. And for us, I think that's the significant takeaway from what happened in participating in CALLI for all of these years. It really has shifted our thinking about how we trust each other, about how we value the input from so many more stakeholders than we did before. I think there was truly a belief that those of us who kind of worked at the district office had worked hard to get to this level, and we were smart and we had a lot of experience and we could solve all of these problems ourselves. And the truth is that the practitioners were often left out of those conversations. And it was CALLI who said, put the right team together. And it really is something that then impacted our culture, because teachers now began to build on their voice, and they felt listened to, and we could hear them, I think, a lot more clearly, and they could hear us, because so often when you're focused on your 30 students, we're an elementary district, and that's kind of what teachers would think about the 30 students that they had. They aren't thinking about how they can impact the system, or how their classroom is part of that bigger system. So yes, I can do a great job with my students in 5th grade, but if the 4th grade teacher didn't do a great job, or if the 6th grade teacher can't expect them to do, to have accomplished certain things, then we're stuck. So the system has to be part of what we're looking at. And that all shifted as part of our work in CALLI. Just that whole idea that we can collaborate, that we can listen to each other, that we can act on different ideas that anybody can bring to the table, and that trust that comes along with that really, really does allow us now to be much more functional. And I have to say, the timing for us, that kind of having gone through this work right before the pandemic hit, and then because we got this whole new wave of issues that we had to resolve, we had really laid a foundation for, okay, we know how to talk to each other. We know how to solve problems together. We know how to give a voice to everyone who has thoughts about what can work here. And it really did, that impacted greatly our ability to really do good things during the pandemic for our students. So it's been a long-term impact that's been exciting to see and continues today.
Thank you for that, Ruben. I appreciate it. And yes, the hope is that the work far outlives the collaboration itself. And you guys just spoke to that, how it's happening in real time. We have just a few minutes left, and so I do want to make sure we have time for any questions that may come up. This is a slide that summarizes some of Ed Partners' learnings that you will have available to yourself, so I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that. But if there are some questions for Lauren or for Ruben or for Dan that are specific to where you're coming from, please don't hesitate to either put them in the chat or to reach out. Just unmute yourself and let us know. But we do have time for a couple questions if folks have them. And Amy mentioned, it's great to see so many of the folks who participated in CALLI that are in different roles now. And so a couple folks are on the call who are able to participate, and we certainly do appreciate that. I think that one of the things that we learned from Dan's work is just the ability and the necessity for us to stop and reflect in service of our districts, and not just rush off to the next thing. So we invest a significant amount of our grant dollars towards research and evaluation so that we can be a better organization. And so we certainly appreciate you guys taking your time today, and don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We've included our contact information here. If you have questions that follow up, or you look at Dan's report and you'd like to ask a question about that. But first of all, big thank you to Lauren and Ruben for not only 5 years of participation, but also taking time to share your reflections here today, and to all of you for taking time. So thanks so much, and best of luck with whatever education throws at us over the next 5 or 6 months. So thanks, everybody.